President Trump at today's summit also emphasizing the need to limit the influence of foreign powers like China, Russia, and Iran in the Western Hemisphere. And joining me now is Marcos Chagas, the editor-in-chief of the Epoch Times Brazil. He's also the Latin America correspondent for the paper's U.S. edition. And Michael Lucci, founder and CEO of State Armor, which helps states enact solutions to global security threats, especially those posed by the Chinese regime. I want to thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And before we begin, let's listen to some of the president's remarks on the foreign interference.
So, and as these situations in Venezuela and Cuba should make clear under our new doctrine, and it is a doctrine, we will not allow hostile foreign influence to gain a foothold in this hemisphere. That includes the Panama Canal, which we talked about. We're not going to allow it. And together we'll protect our sovereignty, our security, and our cherished freedom and independence.
Now, Michael, your reaction to the president's action here?
I think that this action is an application of the Donroe Doctrine, but also of American grand strategy. What the United States wants to do is to be hegemonic or totally dominant in certain areas of the world, and for no one else to be dominant in any other areas of the world. So, of course, starting with the Western Hemisphere, with our friends, partners, and allies in Central and South America, the goal is to eliminate communists and cartels. Those are the two major threats to our hemisphere. And we're seeing the socialist communist regime of Venezuela has been changed. Cuba is probably soon to come. And the drug cartels that are murdering thousands of Americans every year are under pressure throughout Central and South America. That will establish American deterrence across our hemisphere. It'll drive out the Russians, the Chinese communists, Hezbollah terrorists who've also found a foothold across the Western Hemisphere.
Now, Marcos, in the backdrop to all of this is the Iran war. And when it comes to foreign interference, you've mentioned that not just China, but even Iran has had its hands in this hemisphere. So give us an idea of how much influence they've had in Latin America.
Sure. So Iranian influence has been widespread in Latin America. We can talk about Hezbollah and other groups that are backed by the Iranian regime, trading in arms and drugs with criminal groups throughout the region, including Colombia's FARC throughout the years, and also the First Capital Command in Brazil, among others. We can also expand that to the biggest terrorist attacks in the history's region, 1992 and 1994 in Buenos Aires. Those were actively planned by Hezbollah, backed by Iran, including one man who used to work in Iran's embassy in Argentina, a man named Mohsen Rabbani, which has also been detected going through the region, entering through Venezuela, and going through Brazil and other countries in the region for terrorism recruitment. We can expand that as a security threat to the United States. For instance, in 2007, the FBI thwarted last minute a terrorist plot to blow up fuel stocks, fuel terminals in JFK Airport in New York. It was being planned through Hezbollah and Iran, coming from Guyana and Venezuela. So this just gives you a gist of the scale of their operations. In Venezuela especially, we can also talk about investigations that allude to the possibility of uranium being trafficked from Latin America to Iran.
Now, Michael, how does this foreign influence translate to risks to U.S. national security?
Well, what we saw during the last 4 years before President Trump was that there was this endless flow, maybe 10 million people crossed our border. Many of these people were identified as terrorists or associated with the Chinese military, associated with Hezbollah, associated with other groups that pose us real significant threat. As friends and allies in Central and South America align with American policy of preventing sort of the growth of cartels, drug cartels, and the Chinese Communist Party, Russia, Hezbollah throughout our hemisphere, that will lessen the threat significantly over time, structurally, not just as a one-off, because you'll have alliance and alignment between the United States and our partners throughout Central and South America. So overall, this will just enhance the security of everyone, whether it's through greater control of our border or just less terrorism and cartel activity across our hemisphere.
Now, Marcos, some of these countries that attended, like Panama and Bolivia, have significant relationships with China and even Iran. And of course, we're now seeing a shift on this front in some cases. So something to note is that Mexico and Brazil didn't attend this summit. Will this coalition eventually need their support to fully secure the Western Hemisphere?
I mean, when you're talking Mexico, Brazil, and also Colombia, which is a notably absent of the summit, if you want to really fight the cartels, you have to deal with those countries. If you want to counter China, you will have to deal with those countries. When we talk the cooperation between the Chinese Communist Party and Mexican cartels to essentially flood the United States with fentanyl, of course, you will need Mexico to be in there. When we talk about the greatest cocaine producer in the world, that's, of course, Colombian cartels. And when you talk about key ports that are used to traffic cocaine worldwide, you're also talking about Santos and Paranaguá, among other ports in Brazil. So the U.S. will eventually need to have those countries on board. It's interesting because when we talk about the national security strategy that was published last year and the overall national security documents of the current administration, you're talking about two axes of action. So, of course, it's preferable if you have leaders that are politically aligned, like Nayib Bukele or Javier Milei in El Salvador and Argentina, respectively. But it also talks about the possibility that you can pressure or work with partners who are not that aligned in their political tradition to try to make things work out. And I also think that we're seeing this sort of pressure play out very heavily in both Colombia, Mexico, and also, of course, Brazil.
Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that we've seen success in the Mexican theater. I mean, arguably the largest cartel leader in Mexico has been removed by the Mexican military with the assistance of United States intelligence on that. So it's certainly the case for the Americas, for the United States and otherwise, that Mexico is a key player in this. Now, they might have to talk about one thing publicly while perhaps cooperating with the United States privately in order to maintain stability within their country. It seems like something like that might be happening because we have started to see significant operations against the Mexican cartels. If it's not with the assistance of the Mexican government, well, the United States needs to do something about these cartels that are leading to the deaths of, say, 50 to 100,000 Americans through fentanyl that's ultimately coming from China. Maybe it's being stamped in Mexico. Sometimes it's being stamped elsewhere into pills, and then it's flooding our country, killing, it's the number one cause of death for middle-aged men in the United States. It's unacceptable. And I think that President Trump's making it clear to Mexico's leaders that we're not going to sit by as you have cartels killing tens of thousands of Americans every year.
Now, I want you to listen to some of what the president said about cartels, which he ties to foreign influence. So let's go to that now.
These brutal criminal organizations pose an unacceptable threat to national security, and they provide a dangerous gateway for foreign adversaries in our region. And we don't want them near our country either. We don't want them to come in. They're cancer, They're cancer, and we don't want it spreading.
Now, Marcos, President Trump called the cartels a gateway for foreign adversaries. Talk to us about that.
Well, like I mentioned previously, we can talk about Hezbollah trading in arms and drugs. And of course, Hezbollah is essentially an Iranian proxy, and that spreads throughout the region. Another example I can give you is the widespread presence of Tren de Aragua in the United States, which has now been designated as a terrorist organization. And of course, their activities have drastically diminished, if not been nullified, by deportations and by the pressure on Venezuela. The point is that those organizations are very closely linked to asymmetrical warfare by Iran, and ultimately, there are reports that suggest this is also linked to Russia and China, in the sense that those organizations, despite being commanded by Iran, are only able to function because the funding that Iran can provide them comes from trading in oil with China. So when we talk about the totalitarian axis of American adversaries in North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia, you can get to a link of events where those cartels are essentially doing their bidding. And this is not new. When we talk about Cuba specifically, they have provided logistics, funding, and training for communist cartels in the region, because those cartels are not exclusively criminal organizations in a wide amount of cases. If you talk about Sendero Luminoso in Peru, the National Liberation Army and the FARC in Colombia, if you talk going further back to the 60s and 70s about the MR8 and the VAR Palmares in Brazil, those are communist guerrillas that have intermingled their activities with drug trafficking. So you can see how this has a political hue to it, and this helps us understand how this plays out.
Now, Michael, speaking of China, we can see how China props up Mexican cartels through the fentanyl precursors. And this drug is killing tens of thousands of Americans a year. a serious threat. So do you expect the president to take more aggressive military action going forward to root out these cartels?
I expect the president of the United States will do, or the president of Mexico will do it. So I think that President Trump is going to continue to pose the condition to Mexico that either you take care of this problem or we will take care of this problem. And I think that the problem, I think you rightly note that the problem doesn't remain just south of the border. Of course, yes, fentanyl comes in, when the United States allows the border to be open. The cartels are the ones who actually operationalize trafficking of terrorists and children and otherwise into the United States. But furthermore, they create substantial criminal networks within the United States. And who is it that launders all of that money, all those fentanyl profits? So they make money killing Americans. It's the Chinese Communist Party through a variety of ways that launders that money back through China to the cartels so that everybody ends up getting paid. Some of that goes through Canada, actually. Some of that goes through the Canadian banking system, which is a big part of the reason why the United States is not especially happy with Canada right now, is that Canada has been extraordinarily slow. Frankly, they haven't taken action in cracking down on these money laundering networks, these criminal networks that are based largely in Vancouver, but otherwise. And so it's an entire network of criminality where the Chinese Communist Party is supplying a lot of the chemicals that kill people, but then they're laundering the money on the back end and just enhancing criminality within the United States.
All right, Marcos and Michael, I want to thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.